June 12, 1944. Camp Tracy, California. Lieutenant Hiroshi Takahashi stood under a stream of hot water, the steam rising around him as the scorching cascade washed away weeks of grime from his body. His hands trembled, not from the heat, but from a profound realization that was beginning to crack the foundation of everything he had been taught to believe. What the Americans were casually wasting in a single day could have powered his entire destroyer for a week. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the tale of how everyday American abundance broke the spirit of Japan's most dedicated warriors more effectively than any weapon could. Lieutenant Takahashi had been captured during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, what Americans would later call the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The son of a naval officer from Kure, he had graduated near the top of his class at the Imperial Naval Academy in 1939. Takahashi served as a navigation officer aboard the destroyer Tanikaze before his capture. One of the few survivors when American aircraft sank his vessel. In his 5 years of service, he had been taught that America was a paper tiger, materially rich but spiritually bankrupt, incapable of sustaining a prolonged war against the disciplined spirit of the Japanese warrior. "Americans are soft," his commanding officer had often repeated. "They cannot endure hardship. When faced with the sacrifice required for victory, they will crumble." The journey to Camp Tracy had already begun to challenge these beliefs. After his rescue from the sea, Takahashi had been transported on an American hospital ship where, despite being the enemy, he received the same medical attention as wounded American sailors. This contradicted everything he had been told about how prisoners could expect to be treated. The Imperial Japanese Navy had instructed its men that capture meant disgrace, worse than death, torture, humiliation, and eventual execution. Instead, he found himself on a clean cot with regular meals and medical attention for the burns on his arms. But it was the showers at Camp Tracy that truly shattered his worldview. "Water again?" asked Sergeant Kenji Yoshida, Takahashi's bunkmate and a former infantry officer captured at Tarawa. "This is the 3rd time this week." "They shower every day," replied Takahashi, his voice barely above a whisper. "Every single soldier, every single day, hot water." The two men stood in line with 50 other Japanese prisoners, each clutching standard-issue American towels and soap. Yoshida, a stocky man with a perpetual frown, had spent 8 months fighting across the Pacific before his capture. During that time, he had bathed in the ocean when possible, or used a canteen of water to wash himself when absolutely necessary. On Tarawa, fresh water had been so scarce that men drank their daily ration of a single canteen, saving not a drop for washing. Camp Commander Major William Donovan approached the line, accompanied by Technical Sergeant Frank Miller, who served as the camp's chief interpreter. Miller had studied Japanese at the University of California before the war and spoke with a formal precision that the prisoners found both impressive and slightly amusing. "Gentlemen," Miller translated as Donovan addressed them, "we're adjusting the shower schedule. The boilers are being upgraded so you'll have 30 minutes of hot water instead of 20 starting tomorrow." Yoshida turned to Takahashi with disbelief in his eyes. "They are upgrading. The water is already hot enough to scald skin." Donovan continued, "We've also increased the soap ration. Each man will now receive 2 bars per week instead of 1. As Miller translated this announcement, murmurs spread through the line of prisoners. 2 bars of soap per week per man. In the Japanese Imperial Army, an entire squad might share a single bar for a month. "Any questions?" Donovan asked, surveying the group. Captain Masao Kuribayashi, a former staff officer and the highest-ranking prisoner in the camp, stepped forward. At 42, he was older than most of the other captives, with streaks of grey in his close-cropped hair. Before his capture at Makin Atoll, He had served as a logistics officer responsible for fuel allocation. "Major," he said in carefully practiced English, "I am curious. How much fuel does your camp use for these daily hot showers?" Donovan looked surprised at the question. "I don't have the exact figures, but the camp uses roughly 500 gallons of fuel oil daily for hot water and heating. Why do you ask?" Kuribayashi translated for the benefit of the other prisoners, then replied, "In the Imperial Navy, such fuel would be prioritized for ships or essential transport. It is interesting to see it used this way." Donovan laughed. "Captain, we produce over 6 million barrels of oil per day in America. The amount we use here isn't even a drop in the bucket." "Ndi," as Miller translated Donovan's casual response. Takahashi felt something cold settle in his stomach. 6 million barrels daily. The entire Japanese empire struggled to secure 10 diesel barrels a day from their conquered territories. The shower room itself was a testament to American industrial might. 40 shower heads mounted on gleaming pipes, delivering hot water at pressure that seemed impossible to the Japanese prisoners. In the Imperial Navy, officers might receive a hot bath once a week, heated by precious fuel. Enlisted men made do with cold water when available. Here, in this prisoner camp, every man, regardless of rank, enjoyed hot water daily. "They waste more than we ever had," whispered Yoshida as they entered the shower room. Private First Class Toru Watanabe, a young soldier barely 20 years old, stood under the stream of water with his eyes closed in obvious pleasure. Unlike most of the others, he had adapted quickly to captivity, learning English phrases from the guards and adopting American mannerisms. "If this is how they treat prisoners," he said, "imagine how their own people live." "This is propaganda," insisted Corporal Ichiro Tanaka, a hardline believer in Japanese superiority. "They show us this abundance to break our spirit. In reality, American civilians must be suffering to support their war effort." Takahashi remained silent. As an officer, he had access to fuel consumption reports before his capture. He knew the truth of Japan's desperate situation, ships sailing at reduced speeds to conserve fuel, training flights curtailed, reserves dwindling month by month. By 1944, pilots were being sent into combat with less than 10 hours of flight time due to fuel shortages. And yet here, thousands of miles from the front lines, American prisoners enjoyed daily hot showers as if resources were unlimited. After the shower, the prisoners returned to their barracks. Camp Tracy housed approximately 500 Japanese prisoners, mainly officers and non-commissioned officers who were deemed valuable for intelligence purposes. The camp itself was a revelation, clean, well-organized, with adequate food and medical care. Each prisoner had his own bunk with fresh sheets changed weekly, a luxury unimaginable in the crowded barracks of the Japanese military. "Do you know what my division commander told us before we deployed to Guadalcanal?" said Yoshida as they sat on their bunks after dinner. "He said Americans would break within months once they experienced real hardship, that their factories would be unable to replace losses. That was in 1942. He laughed bitterly. 2 years later, they have so much fuel they use it for hot water for enemy prisoners." Takahashi nodded. "On my destroyer, we received orders to reduce speed to 12 knots maximum to conserve fuel. Sailors were punished for using too much fresh water. Meanwhile, American ships pursued us at 30 knots without concern." Private Watanabe joined their conversation. "The guard, Johnson, told me each American shipyard can produce a Liberty ship in 42 days. Each one carries 10,000 tons of cargo." "Propaganda," Tanaka interrupted from his bunk. "American lies." "I've seen them," said Kuribayashi quietly. All eyes turned to the captain. "From my observation post on Makin, I watched 3 Liberty ships unloading simultaneously. The next week, 3 more arrived. Different ships, not the same ones returning." A heavy silence fell over the barracks. For men raised in the tradition of Japanese military austerity, where resources were always scarce and sacrifice was expected, the American abundance was more than surprising. It was existentially threatening. If America could waste resources so casually on prisoners, what did that mean for Japan's chances in this war? The next morning brought another shock. As the prisoners assembled for breakfast, they were led not to the usual mess hall, but to a newly constructed dining facility. "The camp has been upgraded to a Type A facility," Miller explained, as he translated Commander Donovan's announcement. "This means improved rations and facilities according to the Geneva Convention standards." The new mess hall gleamed with stainless steel serving equipment. American kitchen staff in white uniforms stood behind steam tables laden with food. Each prisoner received a tray with compartments containing scrambled eggs, bacon, toast with butter and jam, fresh fruit, and coffee. Corporal Tanaka stared at his tray in disbelief. "This is more food than my family would see in a week in Tokyo." "Protein," noted Yoshida, poking at his eggs. "In the last months on Tarawa, we had rice and occasional fish, sometimes seaweed. American prisoners in our camp received 1/3 the ration of a Japanese soldier, which was already reduced." Takahashi picked up a piece of toast with butter and jam. Butter had become a luxury in Japan by 1941. By 1944, it was practically non-existent for all but the highest-ranking officials, yet here it was, served casually to enemy prisoners. "Lieutenant," Watanabe said, lowering his voice, "I overheard the guards talking yesterday. They were complaining about the food here. They said it's not as good as what they get back home." "Not as good," Yoshida repeated incredulously. "What more could they possibly eat?" Captain Kuribayashi sat at the end of their table, methodically eating his breakfast. Unlike many of the younger officers who expressed their shock openly, Kuribayashi had maintained a composed demeanor since his capture. As a staff officer, he had seen intelligence reports on American industrial capacity before they were sanitized for general consumption. He had harbored private doubts about Japan's ability to win a prolonged conflict, doubts that were now being confirmed daily. After breakfast, the prisoners were assigned to various work details around the camp. Under the Geneva Convention, officers could not be compelled to work, but many chose to do so to alleviate boredom. Takahashi found himself assigned to the camp library, cataloging books alongside Technical Sergeant Miller. "Sergeant Miller," Takahashi began carefully in his limited English. "American soldiers have hot shower every day in all camps." Miller nodded as he shelved a copy of For Whom the Bell Tolls by Ernest Hemingway. "Pretty much. It's standard in all our permanent facilities. Even our forward bases get portable shower units once the front lines stabilize." Takahashi digested this information. "In Japanese Navy, officers have hot bath perhaps once per week. Common sailors, almost never." Miller seemed surprised. "Really? I guess we take some things for granted. My kid brother's fighting in Europe, and he wrote home complaining when his unit had to go 3 days without hot showers during the push into France." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a supply truck. Takahashi watched through the library window as American soldiers unloaded crates of books, magazines, and newspapers. "New shipment," Miller explained. "We get weekly deliveries of reading materials for the camp." Takahashi helped unpack the crates, marveling at the quality and quantity of the printed materials. Brand new books with glossy covers, magazines printed on high-quality paper with vibrant color photographs, newspapers from across America. In Japan, paper had been strictly rationed since 1943. Newspapers had shrunk to 4 pages of poor-quality stock. Books were rarely published, except for essential technical manuals and propaganda. One crate contained recent issues of popular American magazines: Life, Saturday Evening Post, National Geographic. Takahashi paused over an issue of Life featuring a photo essay on American home life during wartime. The images showed well-stocked grocery stores, automobiles on city streets, children playing with new toys. "Is this current?" he asked, pointing to the June 1944 date on the magazine. "Sure is," Miller replied. "That came out just a couple weeks ago." Takahashi carefully turned the pages, studying images of American civilians going about their daily lives. Women in fashionable clothes, shopping in department stores. Advertisements for products that had disappeared from Japanese shelves years ago. Coffee, sugar, meat, gasoline, rubber tires. While there were references to rationing and war bonds, the overall impression was of a society experiencing nothing like the deprivation that had become normal in Japan. "Your civilians still have these things? Even now, in third year of war?" Miller corrected him. "Going on our third year, yes. There's rationing, of course. Gasoline, meat, sugar, coffee are limited, but there's still plenty to go around." That evening, Takahashi shared his discoveries with the other officers in their barracks. The magazine had particular impact, physical evidence that contradicted years of Japanese propaganda about American society collapsing under the pressures of war. "Look at these automobiles," said Yoshida, pointing to an advertisement for Chevrolet, "still in production. In Tokyo, every car has been converted to run on charcoal burners because there is no gasoline for civilians." "And the women," added Watanabe with a grin. "They don't look like they're suffering." Even Tanaka, the most resistant to American propaganda, seemed shaken by the evidence before him. "Perhaps this is just for the camera," he suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. Captain Kuribayashi examined the magazine silently, then spoke. "Gentlemen, we must face facts. Japan entered this war with approximately 7.5 million barrels of oil in reserve. Our annual production from synthetic sources and captured fields reaches perhaps 3 million barrels at maximum capacity." The other men listened intently. Kuribayashi rarely shared such specific information. "The United States," he continued, "produces over 2 billion barrels annually. Their single state of Texas outputs more oil than the entire Japanese empire can access. Their shipyards produce vessels faster than we can sink them. Their factories produce aircraft faster than we can shoot them down. But the fighting spirit of the Japanese soldier," Tanaka began. "Cannot run ships without fuel or fly aircraft without trained pilots," Kuribayashi interrupted sharply. "Spirit does not stop bullets or bombs." The harsh truth hung in the air between them. For men raised on the belief in Japanese exceptionalism, in the inevitable triumph of spirit over material, confronting the reality of American industrial might was more devastating than battlefield defeat. The next morning brought another revelation. As the prisoners lined up for their daily shower, they noticed new fixtures being installed. "What are they doing?" Yoshida asked. "Upgrading the water heaters," replied an American guard named Corporal Jenkins. "The old ones couldn't maintain temperature when all showers were running simultaneously." Takahashi translated for those who couldn't understand English. "But the water was already hot," protested Watanabe. "Too hot sometimes." Jenkins shrugged. "Major says every man deserves a proper shower. Can't have the water going lukewarm halfway through." As the prisoners watched American technicians installing larger water heaters and fuel tanks, Takahashi found himself standing next to Captain Kuribayashi. "You know what this means, Lieutenant?" Kuribayashi asked quietly. "That they have abundant resources," Takahashi replied. "More than that, it means they can afford to care about comfort, even the comfort of enemies. That is a luxury only the truly powerful can afford." Later that day, the prisoners were permitted their weekly visit to the camp canteen, where they could purchase items using credit from their work details. The shelves were stocked with cigarettes, candy, toiletries, and other small luxuries. Most Japanese prisoners approached this abundance with suspicion at first, but over time they had begun to embrace the opportunity to supplement their already generous rations. Sergeant First Class Hideo Nakamura, a veteran of the China campaign before his capture at Tarawa, stood examining American razor blades. In my last posting in the Philippines, officers were sharing razor blades, one blade per squad, resharpened until it fell apart. "Look at this," said Watanabe, holding up a bar of chocolate. "Real chocolate. My younger sisters haven't tasted chocolate since 1940. Takahashi noticed a newspaper on the counter, Stars and Stripes, the American military publication. The headline caught his attention. B-29 production reaches 100 per month. He felt a chill. Each B-29 Superfortress cost more than $600,000 to build, an enormous sum. And the Americans were producing 100 monthly. Captain Kuribayashi had also seen the headline. "Do you understand what this means, Lieutenant? Each of these aircraft can carry 10 tons of bombs. They're building the capacity to drop 30,000 tons of explosives on Japan monthly." "Surely that's propaganda," Takahashi said, echoing Tanaka's frequent refrain. "They cannot possibly produce so many." "I inspected the damage at Truk after their bombing raids," Kuribayashi replied. "I've seen what even their smaller bombers can do, if these numbers are even half accurate." He didn't need to finish the thought. Both men understood the implications for Japanese cities with their densely packed wooden structures. That evening, the prisoners were surprised by the arrival of new uniforms, standard American military fatigues dyed blue to designate prisoner status. Each man received 2 complete sets, plus new underwear, socks, and boots. Corporal Tanaka held up his new uniform with undisguised contempt. "They expect us to wear American clothes now, to abandon our identity completely. Your Japanese uniform was falling apart," Yoshida pointed out practically. "Mine had holes in places I'd rather not mention." "It's about efficiency," said Kuribayashi. "Standardized sizes, mass production. Easier for them to issue these than to repair our original uniforms." Takahashi examined the quality of the fabric, the precise stitching, the sturdy construction. Like everything else in the camp, the uniforms reflected American industrial capacity, standardized, well-made, and abundant. As the weeks passed, the accumulation of daily comforts and constant evidence of American prosperity had a profound effect on the prisoners. Men who had arrived defiant and contemptuous began to question the propaganda they had been fed about American weakness. The daily hot showers became a symbol of this transformation, a regular reminder of the gulf between Japanese austerity and American abundance. One evening in late July, the camp received unusual visitors. A delegation of Japanese-American translators arrived, members of the military intelligence service who had been born in America but spoke fluent Japanese. Their mission was to interview prisoners for intelligence about Japanese military operations, but their impact went far beyond military information. Sergeant George Tanaka, a Nisei from California, conducted interviews in a small office near the camp administration building. When Takahashi's turn came, he was struck by the man's appearance. Well-fed, confident, dressed in a crisp American uniform with Staff Sergeant's stripes. "Lieutenant Takahashi," Sergeant Tanaka began in flawless Japanese, "I understand you served aboard the destroyer Tanikaze before your capture." "That is correct," Takahashi replied cautiously. "I'd like to ask you some questions about Japanese anti-submarine tactics, if you're willing to discuss them." The interview proceeded formally at first, with Takahashi providing minimal information. But as they talked, his curiosity about this Japanese-faced American grew. "May I ask a personal question, Sergeant?" Takahashi ventured. Of course. You are Nihonjin, Japanese by blood, yet you fight for America against Japan. Why? Sergeant Tanaka didn't seem offended by the question. I was born in Los Angeles. My parents came from Hiroshima, but America is my home. I'm as American as anyone else in uniform. Even though you look Japanese, you are not treated differently? A shadow crossed the sergeant's face. There have been challenges. My parents are currently in an internment camp in Arizona, but I volunteered to serve anyway because I believe in American ideals, even when America doesn't always live up to them. This concept, loyalty to ideals rather than ethnicity, was foreign to Takahashi, raised in the homogeneous culture of Japan where blood and nation were inseparable. And how do other American soldiers treat you? My unit respects me. I've earned their trust. Outside the service, he shrugged. There's prejudice, sure, but I can still vote, own property, speak my mind, practice any religion I choose, even criticize the government without fear of arrest. After the interview, Takahashi returned to the barracks deep in thought. The Nisei translator had shaken another pillar of his worldview, the belief in Japanese racial uniqueness and superiority. That night, unable to sleep, Takahashi sat on the edge of his bunk, writing in a journal he had received from the camp library. Around him, 50 Japanese officers and non-commissioned officers slept in clean beds with fresh sheets in a well-ventilated, insect-free barracks. They had eaten 3 full meals that day. They had showered with hot water. They had received medical care, reading materials, new clothing. Lieutenant, you're still awake? Captain Kuribayashi's voice came from the darkness. Hi, Captain. Just thinking. About home? About everything, the differences, the waste. Kuribayashi sat up in his bunk. Not waste, Lieutenant. Capacity. Americans don't waste fuel on hot showers and abundant food. They have so much productive capacity that they can fight a two-front global war and still maintain these standards. But we were told many things, Kuribayashi interrupted gently. I believed them too once. Takahashi hesitated, then asked the question that had been growing in his mind. Captain, can Japan win this war? In the darkness, he couldn't see Kuribayashi's expression, but the long silence was answer enough. I have seen the supply reports, Lieutenant. Even before I was captured, by 1943, our merchant fleet had lost over 2 million tons of shipping to American submarines. Each ship sunk means fuel, food, ammunition that never reaches our forces. Meanwhile, America launches new ships daily. Bah! Then why do we continue fighting? Because surrender is unthinkable, because our leaders cannot admit what they surely must know by now. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of an American guard doing his rounds. Both men fell silent until he had passed. Get some sleep, Lieutenant, Kuribayashi said finally. Tomorrow brings another hot shower. The next morning, the prisoners awoke to unexpected news. Major Donovan called an assembly in the camp courtyard, where Technical Sergeant Miller translated his announcement. Gentlemen, I've been authorized to inform you that effective immediately, you will be permitted to send and receive censored mail through the International Red Cross. A murmur ran through the assembled prisoners. Contact with home had been forbidden until now, partly because Japan had not signed the Geneva Convention regarding prisoners of war. Each man may write 1 letter per week, not exceeding 2 pages. Miller continued translating. You may receive unlimited incoming mail once the system is established. For men who had been told that their families would consider them dead rather than captured, this news was revolutionary. It meant acknowledgement of their status as prisoners. It meant contact with loved ones who might have believed them deceased. This is another American trick, Corporal Tanaka declared as they returned to their barracks. Our families would be ashamed to receive letters from prisoners." But even as he spoke, Tanaka took one of the writing papers and envelopes being distributed. Over the next days, the camp buzzed with the composition of letters home. Men who had accepted they would never communicate with their families again labored over what to say, how to explain their circumstances, whether to describe the conditions of their captivity. "I cannot tell them about the food," said Yoshida, as he struggled with his letter. "They are surely on reduced rations in Japan. It would seem like boasting." "Or about the showers," added Watanabe. "My father would think I had become soft, corrupted." Takahashi faced the same dilemma as he wrote to his parents in Kure. How could he describe Camp Tracy without sounding like he had succumbed to American propaganda? How could he explain that he received better treatment as a prisoner than he had as an officer in the Imperial Navy? In the end, he wrote simply, "I am alive and well. I am treated according to international law. Please do not worry for my health or comfort." 2 weeks later, the camp received news that shocked even the most hardened prisoners. On August 1st, 1944, a special edition of Stars and Stripes was delivered to the camp library. The headline read, "Tinian Falls to Marines, Crucial B-29 Base Secured." The significance was not lost on the Japanese officers. Tinian was less than 1,500 miles from Tokyo, well within range of the B-29 Superfortress bombers they had read about. The strategic implications were clear. "They will bomb the homeland," Kuribayashi said quietly, as the officers gathered to discuss this news. "Not just peripheral targets, but our cities, our factories, our people. Our anti-aircraft defenses," Tanaka began, "are designed to counter aircraft flying at 15 feet or lower," Kuribayashi interrupted. "The B-29 operates above 30 feet. Our fighters cannot reach that altitude effectively, and we have precious little aviation fuel remaining." The reality of Japan's situation settled over the group like a shroud. Men who had entered captivity believing in eventual Japanese victory now faced the prospect of their homeland under direct attack. That evening, as the prisoners lined up for their daily shower, the routine that had once symbolized American waste now carried a different meaning. It represented the gulf in industrial capacity that would determine the war's outcome more surely than any battle. As hot water cascaded over his body, Lieutenant Hiroshi Takahashi closed his eyes and thought of home, of his parents in Kure, of his younger brother serving in the Imperial Army somewhere in the Philippines, of the narrow streets and wooden houses of his neighborhood. He thought of American bombers flying higher than Japanese fighters could reach, of incendiary bombs falling on those wooden structures, of the industrial might represented by the very shower he was taking. In that moment, standing under a stream of hot water that his enemy could afford to provide daily to prisoners, Takahashi accepted what Captain Kuribayashi had already understood. Japan could not win this war. The daily shower had revealed a truth that no propaganda could conceal. 2 months later, in October 1944, the first B-29 raids struck targets on the Japanese home islands. By March 1945, firebombing of Japanese cities had begun in earnest, creating infernos that consumed the wooden structures just as Takahashi had feared. When news of the Tokyo firebombing reached Camp Tracy, with estimates of 100 civilian deaths in a single night, even Corporal Tanaka abandoned his insistence on eventual Japanese victory. In the camp library, Takahashi found an American magazine with photographs of the Boeing factories producing B-29 bombers. One image showed an assembly line with dozens of the massive aircraft in various stages of completion. The caption noted that this was just one of several plants manufacturing the bombers. "Hard to believe, isn't it?" said Technical Sergeant Miller, who had developed a cautious friendship with Takahashi over their months working together. Before the war, That factory was making commercial airliners. The scale is difficult to comprehend, Takahashi admitted. You know what my father does? He works in a factory that used to make refrigerators. Now they make aircraft parts. Last Christmas, he wrote that they had doubled production compared to 1943. Refrigerators converted to aircraft parts, automobile plants producing tanks, shipyards launching Liberty ships in weeks rather than months. And everywhere, the abundance that allowed enemy prisoners to receive daily hot showers, adequate food, medical care, and clean clothing. In his journal that night, Takahashi wrote, "The Americans defeat us not with superior fighting spirit or tactics, but with hot water, with abundance so great they can afford to be humane to enemies. How can we fight a nation that has so much it can waste fuel heating water for prisoners to bathe daily? This is not merely industrial capacity, it is a different conception of what is possible, of what is normal." Indeed, after Japan's surrender in August 1945, the prisoners of Camp Tracy faced repatriation to a homeland transformed by defeat. As they prepared to return to Japan, Captain Kuribayashi gathered the officers for a final conversation. "Gentlemen, we return to a Japan that will need to rebuild. Remember what you have seen here. Not just the material abundance, but the systems and principles that created it. Mass production, standardization, efficiency. These are lessons we must take home." For Lieutenant Hiroshi Takahashi, the journey home was a journey into uncertainty. His last act before leaving Camp Tracy was to shower, one final experience of the hot water that had come to symbolize American industrial might. As the steam rose around him, he reflected on how this simple daily routine had revealed the truth about the war more clearly than any battle or bombing raid. Takahashi returned to Japan in early 1946 to find his hometown of Kure heavily damaged by bombing, but his parents alive. His brother had not survived the fighting in the Philippines, in the devastated landscape of post-war Japan. With its food shortages and damaged infrastructure, the memory of Camp Tracy's showers seemed like a dream from another world. In the decades that followed, Takahashi would be part of Japan's economic transformation, applying the lessons he had learned as a prisoner. He would eventually become an executive at Toyota Motor Corporation, implementing the mass production techniques and efficiency principles he had observed in America. When Japanese manufacturing began to challenge American dominance in the 1970s, he would sometimes tell younger colleagues about the showers at Camp Tracy and what they had taught him about industrial capacity. By 1980, Takahashi's home in Tokyo had 2 bathrooms, each with its own water heater providing unlimited hot water. Sometimes, standing under the shower in his modern bathroom, he would remember that first hot shower as a prisoner and the realization that had come with it. The true measure of a nation's power, he had learned, was not in its weapons or the fighting spirit of its soldiers, but in its ability to waste resources on comfort and humanity, even for enemies. Japan had lost the war not in dramatic naval battles or last stands on besieged islands, but in the mundane miracle of daily hot showers for prisoners of war. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.